Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. It's sort of a commonplace of ancient virtue ethics, at least among those schools that thought that the soul had more than one main part to it that could decide things and, affect the person, to think that the irrational part should be subjected to the rational part. We see this in Plato, we see this in Aristotle, we see this in others as well. And Plutarch is going to, raise a problem pretty early on in his work on moral virtue that somebody might bring up. They might say, well, this kind of doesn't make sense. So if the irrational part really is irrational, then how can it actually obey or listen to or be determined by the rational part? And what he says is, I think if you reflect sufficiently on the power that reason has, the dunamis, the capacity that reason possesses, which he brings up in a verse, how great it is, how far it penetrates or extends, through its, as he says, mastery and guidance, then it becomes a bit more clear. And he's going to provide us with a number of considerations that are sort of filling this out for us. So we could say that an argument is going on here by gesturing at different things that reason is doing in saying, yes, this is what reason does in relation to the irrational part. And he's going to close it by some important explanations. So he tells us that reason masters and guides. And the word there is kratein, again. So guiding, driving is another way of thinking about kratein, is to have power over. And it does so with the irrational part, not by harsh, skeleros, right? You might say mean ways, right? It's not whipping it or anything like that, or by inflexible methods, but by flexible methods. It accommodates itself, and that's part of what it means to be reasonable. So it's not just repressing or hurting or anything like that, the irrational part. And he says that, this is much more effective than any sort of constraint, anankes, necessitating, or even violence, bias, or force, we might say. And then he's going to bring in some interesting considerations. So the first consideration that he brings in, this is kind of what we call an a fortiori argument, saying, well, if this is the case over here, then even more so the case over here. So he tells us that the body parts, and what does he bring up here, are breathing, our sinews and bones, other parts of the body. Well, they're sure as hell irrational. They don't have like a mind within them, a rational, calculative faculty. My finger doesn't know what it's doing, right? But my finger can be necessitated by reason. I think, well, I want to use this as a demonstration for you right now. I've got my finger pointed. Let's make it not pointed anymore and touch the thumb. And it does it. Sometimes our bodies don't obey exactly. We might have a headache and we're like, reason, make my headache go away. Well, that's not going to work. But reason could tell you to go take some painkillers, which might help you out. So he says, when an impulse comes, with reason shaking the reins, as it were. All these parts are drawn together in ready obedience. So, for example, when a person decides to run, their feet are keyed up for action. When they purpose to throw or grasp, their hands fall to their business, right? And so, this is a good example. Then he starts talking about things where the body's involved, but the irrational part of the soul is also involved, the emotional, passionate part of the soul. And he's going to give the example of Odysseus when Penelope is crying, right? Odysseus pitied his lamenting wife. He feels sad about that, right? But he kept his eyes fixed within their lids. With guile, he hid his tears. And so Plutarch says, under subjection to his judgment, he kept his breathing and his blood and his tears back. He held back that emotion which would normally be moving his body in a certain way. Sexual desire, another great example. He says, a proof of this is the shrinking and withdrawal of the private parts. Now, of course, he's talking about men, which hold their peace and remain quiet in the presence of beautiful maidens and youths. Why? Not because they're just, prudish or anything like that, but because reason, logos, or law, nomos, says those people are off limits. And he says another proof of this is if you realize that you did the wrong thing, for example, got involved with somebody who you're enamored of a sister or a daughter, your lust is actually going to be driven down by reason, because reason's going to say, no, buddy, that's not for you. Similarly with food. We have desire for and enjoyment of food. Nothing wrong with that. But if we realize that the food is unclean, or actually just not clean, right? Or is unlawful, it's not something that we're supposed to have, he says we have a bodily reaction to this. Reason tells us this. This judgment is attended by some emotional feelings, displeasure, remorse, but also the body might start to feel nausea, right? And throw up the food. So those are some examples of the body and the soul working together, the irrational parts and reason having control over them. And he says, let's talk about another thing, music. He's brought this up already earlier. So he tells us that we have all these different instruments which the musical art has devised. They don't have soul, but they can produce effects on our souls, right? And they can lead us to feel certain things. And it's not just a purely irrational thing. It's not just pushing certain psychological buttons, because this can actually be guided by reason. So music can do a lot of stuff. Like he says, it can, give us joy, grief. It can reproduce or literally bring in the judgments, the krises, the passions, the pathe, the feelings, we could say, and even the characters of certain people. And he says that Zeno, the famous Stoic, on his way to the theater, remarked to his pupils, let's observe what harmony and music, gut and sinew, wood and bone can send forth, can do for us when they participate in, when they partake of reason, logos, proportion. Now, what's being translated there as proportion is literally rhythm, rhythmos, right? And order or proper arrangement, which is taxis, right? So these are ways in which somebody who's using the rational part can actually affect the irrational part in, quite reliable and deep ways. He also brings up animals. And again, this is kind of an a fortiori argument. So if it can bear upon animals who don't have any reason in them whatsoever, but they can be determined by human rationality. And how are they determined by human rationality? Well, they're subordinated to reason through habit, making them do things over and over again. Nurture, literally threpsis, the kind of food that you're giving them, right? We talk about certain animals as being very food motivated. And he even goes so far as to talk about teaching, didaskalia, right? They can be brought to utter intelligible sounds, to move, to assume postures, and to act in a manner conformable to due proportion and our advantage, like war horses, as he gives the example here. Or think about pets. You train your dog to not take the dog biscuit until it's, here's the word, okay, go ahead and eat it. Well, that's exactly what he's talking about here. So if reason can do that through the intermediary of a human being training an animal, so much more so can reason do that to the irrational part of the human being. Finally, he's going to conclude this by talking about how the spirited, so the thumotic, and the appetitive, the epithumotic part of the human being, the two parts of the irrational part, they listen to the thinking part, right? And he says, by their very nature they do this, and they are affected by it. They feel things because of it. And they are disposed by its agency, sun diatithesthai. So they are placed into certain positions, we might say. And then he goes on and says, by the way, these parts are not living apart from the intelligence. They're not separated from it. They're not molded from without just by the body, or any sort of, as he's going to translate it here, extraneous violence or blows, but they're connected with the intelligence, and they're in association with it, and they're influenced by it. So this is why reason can indeed work upon the irrational parts of ourselves to make them more amenable to and place them in relation to what reason suggests that they ought to not just do, but even feel.